FPL Game Week 28 final team selection decisions. Another game week is finally back. It feels like it has been a long time. In today's video, we're going to go through hopefully everything you need to know going into the upcoming deadline to make the final decisions that you need. We're going to cover a little bit of an injury update. We're going to cover forwards because, of course, if you own the likes of Alexander Isak, you're wondering if he's going to play. If you own Cunha and Mateta, you might be looking at replacements as well. So we'll discuss all of that. We'll look at projections. We'll look at my team. And we'll have a look at the big benching rankings that, of course, you need to set your lineup for Game Week 28. What is up, everyone? FPL Harry here. Before we dive in, 2,000 likes is the aim. Subscribe if you are new around here as well. And diving into the final decisions, we, of course, are going to start with Liverpool. There are lots of questions because Liverpool played a very tough game against PSG earlier this week on Wednesday before playing Southampton at home on Saturday before then playing PSG again on Tuesday. Now, Arne Slot has mentioned that if the game was 5 or 6 days apart, he would pick the same team probably that he did midweek. However, he has hinted that there might be a little bit of rotation needed because of how big those games are. So, do we think the likes of Mo Salah, do we think the likes of Trent are going to start? Personally, I do. I do think there is a decent chance that they might only get 50, 60, 70 minutes depending on how the game goes. But Arne Slot has hinted and really said in the past, particularly early on in the season, that he much rather wins games and then makes changes once the game is won than risk rotating the team and it not winning the game. So when we look at the captaincy ranking, I do still have Mo Salah top of the pile. There is a little bit of doubt, and if you think that doubt is too big in your mind, then you could look to move someone like Salah and captain a Cole Palmer, but I wouldn't be benching any of these players. Like I wouldn't be benching Trent. I wouldn't be benching a Van Dijk or an Alisson or a Salah, for example. Some of the others like a Luis Diaz or a Cody Gakpo are a little bit more up for debate, but I do think Salah should start at home to Southampton this weekend. Next up is what should you do if you own a Matheus Cunha or you own a Mateta, for example, or another forward? Should you be looking to sell them this week or should you wait? Now, if you don't own Chris Wood, selling them to Chris Wood is a very simple move this week, and he's my number one replacement. However, I do think for a lot of you, if you have a good bench, benching them this week and then looking to do a couple of transfers in Game Week 29 to go and buy Erling Haaland, for example, you're not going to sell Cole Palmer this week because he plays Leicester. But next week, once he goes away to Arsenal, you could downgrade a Cole Palmer, for example, and downgrade a Trent and do Cunha up to Haaland. And I think that'll be really popular next week. So if you don't have to sell a Cunha or a Mateta this week, then I would just bench them. For example, if you've got a Dango Atari, you've got a Morgan Rogers, you've got an Elanga, I would just play all of these and probably bench your Cunha or Mateta. Now, if you've got both Cunha and Mateta in your lineup, then I would sell Cunha first because Mateta might be back and it might change your plans going into Game Week 29 and 30. Of course, Crystal Palace do blank though, so he can't play, but he might be back into Game Week 30. I do think I'd sell Cunha first. I'd probably go to Chris Wood, but if you can hold off and go to Haaland in Game Week 29 is probably my recommendation. And the final one is going to be, will Newcastle risk Alexander Isak going into Game Week 28? We have heard from Eddie Howe that it was just fatigue and he has trained every day this week. He has been pictured doing some training, not really that many pictures, but Newcastle don't tend to give it to us. They don't play until Monday night, but of course after that they do have the Carabao Cup final. My general impression of Alexander Isak and Newcastle is if he is available, he will play and he will start. That is my general opinion, that I would not be selling Isak and I would not be benching Isak this week. I do expect him to start. I will be starting him in my lineup. Most of us have an okay or at least someone on the bench in case he misses out. And that's kind of the same for everyone, right? I did put on the on Twitter a little poll of who you'd get off your bench if Isak didn't play. And there are a lot of defenders. There's lots of Mikalenkos. There's lots of Robinsons at Fulham, for example. There's quite a lot of Kirkes as well. Maybe the odd Rodgers, Elanga, that sort of people in midfield. So there's not really strong benches to cover it. So if you're in that position, you're not alone. I do think Alexander Isak will get minutes against West Ham, though. Next up is going to be injuries, and I apologize. Literally, builders have just started drilling outside of my house. I've literally just sat there for about 10 minutes trying to wait for it to stop, and it has quietened down, so hopefully it stays quiet for the rest of the video. But anyway, signing off actually at Wolves. So, of course, Cunha is suspended for a minimum of 3 games. There is a little bit of talk that it's a minimum of 4 games because it's his second offence, but that only applies if he was given a red card, we believe, on the pitch, which he wasn't in the first instance a while ago. If you remember when he stole someone's glasses, he was banned retrospectively. Now, At the moment, it is a 3-game ban, but it may well get extended. So if you've got Cunha, he's a definite sell. But there is some positive news for Wolves. They've had quite a few players, as you can see here. Monetsi, Bellegarde, Guedes, Rodrigo Gomez, and Agbadou all look like they are back and available for Wolves in terms of selection, which, although they've lost Cunha, it does boost their appeal a little bit. And I've been quite down on Strand Larsen this week as a potential replacement or a potential forward you're looking to buy. I don't love it still. I think there's some better players you could buy. But with some of these coming back, particularly maybe Gomez and Guedes in their attack, it does definitely boost them. And Agbadou coming back in their defense does boost their defense as well. So it's a little bit more positive than maybe we thought initially. And if they had Cunha available, they would be looking like they could go on a really nice run with the fixtures they've got. So there are some okay options, and we might be looking at them going into Game Week 29 when they play Southampton. We're probably not buying them this week, though. Next up is Mateta, so it does look like he's ruled out. He says that he's at home. His mum flew over from France to look after him. He isn't going to play against Ipswich. They expect him to come on their sort of warm weather training that they have planned over the international break. It doesn't look like he's going to go away with France either over the international break, but he should be back going into the FA Cup and then into Game Week 30 as well. So if your plan was to just bench him and have him back in your team in Game Week 30, you might still have that. It just depends what you've got on your bench going into Game Week 28. And the final one is Cody Gakpo. Now, he has Southampton at home. He's been a little interesting one. He didn't feature at all in the double and then has come back and made a couple of appearances off the bench. Then he didn't play at all against PSG. And Arne Slot said he didn't train yesterday on Thursday. It's going to be sort of touch and go if he's going to be able to play. I personally don't see them risking Gakpo from the start in this game. From him to go from having no minutes and not even being able to be in the squad against PSG to then being able to start a game against Southampton, which they should be able to win without Gakpo and not take the risk on a first team player like that, I would be really surprised if he starts. Now, if you own him, you could keep him, play him, and take a chance that he does start, because if you're selling to someone like a Chris Wood against Man City, you could just take a chance on Gakpo. But if you've got Gakpo and no one on your bench to cover, I probably would be looking to sell, because my general prediction is that Gakpo won't start this week. Next up at Brighton, so it looks like Mitoma just had cramp and he is available for selection against Fulham this weekend. Not really much to say about that. Next up at Newcastle, two very bad bits of injury news. Of course, Alexander Isak was a positive, but Lewis Hall has been ruled out for the season. So if you've got him, he's a definite sell. And Sven Botman also looks like he's going to be out for about 8 weeks with another recurring knee issue that he had that kept him out for about 9 months this time last year. If you are looking at a Newcastle defender, it is likely that it will be Shah, Byrne as the two centre-backs, Livramento at left-back, and probably Kieran Trippier at right-back, although I'm not certain how good they are. And of course, they do blank in Game Week 29 as well. Looking at one final one, if you've got a cheap defender in Greaves or someone on your bench, but you might have Vandenberg at Brentford. He is expected to return to training for Brentford before Game Week 29. He might be available for selection. It doesn't guarantee that he'll come back into that Brentford team, though, because they've defended very well over the past few weeks, and he might just have lost his place. Now, very briefly to look at captaincy. Liverpool are projected to score more goals. Salah is projected to score more points, and almost 85% of you are projecting that you will captain Mo Salah. Now, it probably comes down to, do you think Salah will start? And if you think Salah will start, you're probably going to captain him. Even if you think, oh, he's only going to play 60 or 70, the chances are he's only going to play 60 and 70 and get taken off if the game is already won. If it's still 0-0, Salah's probably going to stay on the pitch. But if it's 3-0, yes, Salah might come off after 70, but that's probably because he's already done the damage that he is able to do. So if you think Salah is going to start, which I do, I would be captaining Salah. Palmer does offer a good differential. He didn't play fantastically in the Conference League. He did have chances against Southampton last week as well. He is definitely not a bad alternative. So if you're watching this and thinking, Harry, Salah's not going to start against Southampton, it's then a Palmer captaincy at home to Leicester, absolutely. But I do think Salah will start. He might not play 90 because of the PSG game on Tuesday, but even a 60, 70 minute Salah against Southampton could do so much damage, and that is where my armband is at the moment. Now, there's been a lot of chip talk going into Game Week 28 because of the round of the FA Cup. We're not going to do it in a lot of detail. We're going to do just the headlines. If you want more detail on chip strategy, there are still people asking questions in the comments, which are all answered in the chip strategy video that we did put out earlier this week. So if you haven't watched it, or after the deadline, you have a time over the weekend, go and check that out because that has all the detail and everything you need to know about deciding on when the best time is to play your wildcard, when the best time is to play the assistant manager, and what sort of we're waiting for to make those final decisions. So just a couple of things, the key takeaways from that. The FA Cup draw makes it very difficult to predict who is likely to blank and who is likely to double because, for example, Fulham Crystal Palace, Brighton Nottingham Forest, Bournemouth Man City, those games are really, really difficult to call. So trying to predict who doubles and blanks is really hard. So as a result, playing your chips early in game week 28 or 29 are less good. They are worse than they were because you're then trying to predict the future if you're playing those chips early, and it might be more difficult to navigate in the future. If you are on the strategy of free hit 29, that's absolutely fine. Some of you will do that. It's not the worst strategy. I personally don't like it and I'm not doing it myself, but it might fit your team structure if you do have lots of players out with a blank in game week 29. That being said, you're probably going to end up wildcarding in game week 34 in the next blank to try and navigate that after the doubles in game week 32 and predicted in game week 33. The final one, if you are not free hitting in game week 29, the chances are you want to make no real non-essential transfers. If you're buying players for 29, that is essential because you need to put out 11 players. Most of you without the free hit will be looking to wildcard in game week 31. If you've still got the assistant manager, it's a little bit more complicated because that also might be the best window to play the assistant manager. But generally, after game week 29, do not do anything for 2 weeks until we get the FA Cup. So after game week 29, there's an international break, then there is an FA Cup weekend, and only after that, 2 weeks after the game week 29 deadline, will we start to look at game week 30. It will probably be the two most boring weeks of FPL, but you have to be patient. Once the game week 29 deadline passes, do not do anything at all. If you're planning on wildcarding in game week 30, do not activate it. Do not make early transfers to try and catch price changes, because if things go differently and we don't get the announcements by game week 30, you will not want to do it. Going back to game week 28 and having a look at best players to buy, of course, again, it reminds you that it depends on your chip strategy. If you're free hitting in game week 29, Crystal Palace, Liverpool, Newcastle, Aston Villa can all be players to buy, but the majority of you are not playing your free hit in game week 29. So that is really what we're focusing on in this players to buy section. Saar is in there in goal with the fixtures that they have between now and game week 31. Again, this is really having an eye on game week 28, 29, and 30 because almost all of you with your wildcard will probably play it in game week 31. So this looks at the next sort of 3 fixtures for a lot of those teams. Some of the picks do work long term. It's very difficult now at this point in the season to recommend players to buy for everyone that fits every chip strategy. So although Saar is top, for example, Haaland is top, Wood is top, it might depend a little bit on your chip strategy. So do just take the players that I'm recommending and apply it a little bit to your chip strategy when you plan on wildcarding and just make sure it works for what you're planning. Generally, Saar, Pickford, Sells, and Kepa are the 4 keepers I like. If you're not free hitting in 29, if you are, then Henderson of Crystal Palace is probably the way that I would go. Saar is the only one really that has 3 good fixtures between now and game week 31. Into defense, we've gone Nori. Also, Agbadu being back for Wolves at 4 million is probably the best cheap defender to go and buy now if you're looking at that price. You could also have a look at Cresswell at West Ham as well, but I would say that the fixtures for Wolves are slightly better than that of West Ham. I also like Wan-Bissaka, maybe slightly more nailed for West Ham, as we have seen Cresswell drop out if they ever go to a back 4, but I do expect them to stay with a back 5. Also in my top 3, we've got Kirkes. I do think Bournemouth will do well against that Spurs side. Spurs have to focus on their Europa League game, and then it is Gvardiol. Looking next week, if you're buying in game week 29, Gvardiol and Kirkes may well go above 8 Nori, but if you're buying this week, you probably want 8 Nori for Everton at home. And then number 6 is Munoz. Now, generally, if you're free hitting in game week 29, Munoz is essential. If you're not, he could still be a buy depending on what it does for your team next week. If it means you're putting out a player less, that's someone like a Greaves, then it doesn't really matter. Like if you could do Greaves to Munoz and then play 10 next week and not play Greaves, I don't mind that. But if you're selling, I don't know, another like a Lewis Hall, I would probably go to 8 Nori over Munoz because of the fixture in game week 29, and it's a good one against Southampton as well. Into midfield, if you don't own Kluivert, he remains my number 1. We don't have any Dango Ouattara in here because I'm not certain he's going to start against Spurs. And Burma in number 2 with the next couple of fixtures not being bad and Villa not travelling particularly well after European games. Bowen, I don't mind. Now, Paqueta might be back for West Ham on Monday night, which might mean Bowen's not on penalties, but it does mean they're a little bit more creative. I don't mind a double up on Bournemouth mids with Semenyo and Kluivert. Minte, another really nice cheap one, or you could go to Gibbs White. Gibbs White is probably better than Alanga now, looking at some of the data and some of the underlying stuff that we've seen. I probably changed that from the transfer targets video I put out, and I would put Gibbs White above Alanga, but there is 1.2 million between them. And if you can't afford Gibbs White, I like Minte. I also do like Alanga as well. Moving up front, Haaland is number one. But as I said at the beginning, if you can't buy him this week, or you have to sell Salah, Trent, Palmer to do it, then just wait and buy him in game week 29, which is what my plan is. And a lot of people are planning on doing as well. Chris Wood, number two, if you don't own him and you need a forward this week, is probably the best one to buy. Then it is Visser. Some people don't like him because of the fixtures, and I get that. But his data is just head and shoulders above everyone else. And the fixtures are not too bad. And Villa at home is still a good fixture this week. Marmoush is in there if you can't buy Haaland. There is a little bit of doubt if City will rotate against Leicester at home, which is game week 30. Now, you're probably thinking, Harry, that doesn't matter. That's miles away. But if you're buying a striker for the next 3 weeks, and I told you Marmoush didn't start Leicester, you have to go with a little bit of caution that could be a De Bruyne game, because they play in the FA Cup the weekend before against Bournemouth, and De Bruyne is not at it, right? So you probably expect Marmoush to start that game. Could De Bruyne start Leicester at home? It's possible. Could Foden start that game? Yes. So Marmoush is probably not as high up as maybe I thought he would, but he's not bad punt if you're not going with Erling Haaland in your team. Then it is Beto, and then it is Strand Larsen. If we see Evan Nilsson start against Spurs, he'll probably be right up there. I just don't think it's a guarantee he starts this week. So if I'm buying a striker this week, Evan Nilsson is probably not the one I would go with. Now, you will notice that there's no Chelsea in this at all. So you could look at Neto, you could look at Cucurella. The issue is if you're buying and then they go Arsenal away, Spurs at home after that, it's just not that great. You're buying really for one fixture. Although they're probably better than most players on this list for game week 28, I don't think they're better than most of the players on this list for the next 3 weeks. Next up is benching rankings. We've made the benching ranking list even bigger. We now have 30 outfield players on this list. If I'm still missing players that you need, I don't know how, because I feel like I've got everyone on this list now. In terms of goalkeepers, Alisson 1, then it's Jorgensen, Henderson, Sarr, Raya, Pickford, Verbruggen, then Flecken, then Areola. Sells is quite low down. He just does play against Manchester City, and Kepa away at Spurs is probably at the bottom as well. But generally, not that many of you are having two goalkeepers, because a lot of you will, of course, own Fabianski, who has lost his place. Moving now into the defenders, midfielders, and forward section. If you've got ISAK, I would just be starting him. Then we've got Mbermo. Then it is Kluivert, Bowen. If you've got Sarr against Ipswich, definitely start him. Same with Eze as well. He's not actually on this list, but if you own Eze, definitely start him. Then it is Visser. Visser over Watkins, but I would be starting Watkins. Watkins over Chris Wood. Chris Wood over Semenyo. It's close between those, but the home striker on penalties just sways it for Chris Wood. Then we've got Fernandes. He's high up. He's creative. He's on penalties, but he does play against Arsenal. Then it is Matoma. Then it is Minte. Then it is Marmoush. Forest are a good defense. Like, Marmoush is not an easy game. João Pedro is 14th in this list because I'm not 100% guaranteeing that he starts. I think it will be Minte and Matoma, then Rutter, and probably one of João Pedro and Welbeck. I think it's more likely that it's João Pedro, which is why Welbeck is 19th in this list. But I can't be for certain that João Pedro starts. So most of you won't have the luxury of deciding of João Pedro to start him or not. And that's absolutely fine. He probably will start, but it's not guaranteed, which is why he's slightly lower down this list. João Pedro over Beto, Beto over Evan Nilsson, Rodgers also in there. Then it is Jimenez, who's not guaranteed to start because Muniz has been playing well. Then it is Welbeck, then it is Ranieri, Alanga, Dango, and Gakpo. Gakpo I don't think starts. Dango, I'm pretty 50-50 on it. Maybe he does, but if you have the luxury of benching him, then that's fine. If you don't, then that's fine as well. Most of you probably don't have the luxury. Like, I'd rather play Dango and keep Cunha and sell Cunha to Haaland next week than sell Cunha this week and bench Dango. But there is a doubt, which is why he's so far down this list. That being said, I don't love most of the defenders. If you've got Munoz and you've got Trent, of course, they're automatic starts. But outside of that, Gabriel, probably over 8 Nori, then it's Kirkes, then it's Mikalenko, then it's Robinson, then it's Aina, and then it's Gvardiol. Gvardiol is a good pick, but mainly from game week 29 onwards. Briefly looking at projections, there do look like there are a few home bankers this week. Crystal Palace, Chelsea, and Liverpool all predicted to score over 2 goals. At least Liverpool predicted to score over 3 goals, and all of them hitting the 40% chance of a clean sheet. Arsenal also hitting over a 40% chance of a clean sheet going away to Manchester United as well. Outside of that, there are some very difficult games to call. Forest City, Spurs, Bournemouth, West Ham, Newcastle, Brighton, Fulham, Wolves, Everton, even Brentford, Villa. Those are very difficult to call outside of those 4 big fixtures this week. Moving on, if you've got the assistant manager active, Ange Postecoglou at home to Bournemouth is predicted a lot. I don't think I'd be doing that. I'd probably going with a banker on Arnie Slot or Maresca this week. You could punt though on Graham Potter at home to Newcastle on Monday night is probably my most favoured table bonus manager if you want to pick one this week. And finally, wrapping up by looking at my team going into game week 28. Alexander Isak, the positive update was positive enough for me. I'm just going to roll my transfer. I've got Mikalenko on the bench. If Alexander Isak does miss out completely, I want to take the 4 free transfers going into game week 29. Then I can do my best to get Erling Haaland in and make sure I'm putting 11 players out. That is always the plan, and that's what I continue to do. Salah does have the armband, as per what I said in the captaincy debate section at the beginning. I will have a plan over the next couple of days to try and bring in Erling Haaland, but I do not plan on making early transfers. One of the big reasons for that is the Spurs game in the Europa League. If Spurs get knocked out next Thursday, the prediction for the game week 36 double will likely disappear. The reason there is a 36 double is because Aston Villa play Spurs in game week 37. And if Spurs are still in the Europa League, there is a chance it can't go into the midweek of 37 because it's the Europa League final that midweek. So if Spurs get knocked out, it might change, give us the first glimpse of an updated chip strategy. So I just need all the information I can get because I'm not certain when I'm wildcarding because I've still got the assistant manager chip. So let me roll my transfer this week. Hope Isak plays. The rest of it looks pretty good this week. Salah with the armband. I'll probably wait until Thursday earliest to make any transfers, if not Friday, the deadline stream on Saturday next week. And let's see. I'll probably look to buy Erling Haaland. I can't see myself not doing it because I still own Ollie Watkins. And then we can have a look. And if I miss price rises and price drops, that's fine. Information is key at the moment. And that is all for final decisions going into game week 28. Of course, the deadline is on Saturday morning. The usual, we're back to usual deadlines. I cannot wait. 9 a.m. until 11 a.m. on Saturday morning. We'll be live with the game week 28 deadline stream. If you still have questions that aren't answered in this very long video, it's almost half an hour long, so I need to wrap it up. If you have questions that are not answered in this, drop them all in the comment section down below and I'll do my best to answer some now. If not, bring them over to the deadline stream on Saturday morning and we'll spend 2 hours doing my team planning, answering some of your questions as well. It feels like there's a lot of role transfers this week, or people are just waiting for all the information that they can get, which is hopefully in this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Any questions, as I said, drop them in the comments. 2,000 likes is the aim. Subscribe if you're new around here, and I'll be back again very soon.